Today we have some more actual history about the United States Revolution. We will hear about some of the events that preceded the Battle of Kings Mountain, which occurred in South Carolina on October 7, 1780. This was one of the most significant battles in the Southern Campaign. We will be reading from this book, Kings Mountain and Its Heroes, by Lyman C. Draper. This book was published all the way back in 1881. Today's episode will focus on the British commander at Kings Mountain, Major Patrick Ferguson. At the time of the battle, he was considered the finest marksman in the British Army, and one of its most distinguished military commanders. As you will see, Ferguson appears to have been one of the more respectable and humane British commanders, despite, of course, being on the wrong side of the United States Revolution. Ferguson may have even spared General Washington's life in one military engagement. Ferguson's more noble actions will be contrasted with those of Banastre Tarleton, who is known for his brutal conduct during the Southern Campaign. After the war, Tarleton would shamelessly boast that he had killed more men and ravished more women than any man in America. No man, perhaps of his rank and years, ever attained more military distinction in his day than Patrick Ferguson. As his name will hereafter figure so prominently in this narrative, it is but simple justice to his memory, and alike due to the natural curiosity of the reader, that his career should be as fully and impartially portrayed as the materials will permit. He was the second son of James Ferguson, afterward Lord Pitfor, an eminent advocate and for 12 years one of the Scotch judges, and was born in Aberdeenshire, Scotland in 1744. His mother was Anne Murray, daughter of Alexander, Lord Elibank. His father and his uncle, James Murray, Lord Elibank, were regarded as men of large culture, equal in erudition and genius to the authors of the Scottish Augustan age. Having acquired an early education, young Ferguson, says a British writer, sought fame by a different direction, but was of equally vigorous and brilliant powers. When only in his 15th year, a commission was purchased for him, and he entered the army July 12, 1759, as a cornet, in the 2nd or Royal North British Dragoons, serving in the wars of Flanders and Germany, wherein he distinguished himself by a courage as cool as it was determined. Young Ferguson joined the army in Germany soon after the engagement on the plains of Minden. Some skirmishing took place in the subsequent part of that year. On the 13th of June, 1760, the dragoons to which he was attached with other corps drove the French cavalry from the field, and chased their infantry in disorder through Warburg, and across the Rhymel River, gaining from the commander-in-chief the compliment of having performed prodigies of valor. During the year 1761, the dragoons were similarly employed, but suffered much from the bad quality of the water. Ferguson, becoming disabled by sickness, was sent home, and remained the most of the time in England and Scotland from 1762 until 1768. On the 1st of September in the latter year, a commission of captain was purchased for him, in the 70th Regiment of Foot, then stationed in the Caribbee Islands in the West Indies, whither he repaired, and performed an important service in quelling an insurrection in the Caribs on the island of St. Vincent. The regiment remained in the Caribbee Islands till 1773. About this period, Captain Ferguson was stationed a while in the peaceful garrison of Halifax in Nova Scotia, and disdaining inglorious ease, he embarked for England, where he assiduously employed his time in acquiring military knowledge and science. When the disputes between the mother country and her colonies were verging toward hostilities, the boasted skill of the Americans in the use of the rifle was regarded as an object of terror to the British troops. These rumors operated on the genius of Ferguson, and he invented a new species of rifle, which could be loaded with greater celerity, and fired with more precision than any then in use. He could load his newly constructed gun at the breech, without using the ramrod, and with such quickness and repetition as to fire 7 times in a minute. He was regarded as the best rifle shot in the British Army, if not the best marksman living, excepting possibly his old associate George Hanger, and in his adroitness and celerity in loading and firing, whether prostrate or erect, he is said to have excelled the best American frontiersman, or even the expert Indian of the forest. He often practiced and exhibited his dexterity in the use of the rifle, both at Blackheath and Woolwich. Such was his execution and firing that it almost exceeded the bounds of credibility. On the 1st of June, 1776, Captain Ferguson made some rifle experiments at Woolwich, in the presence of Lord Townshend, Master of Ordnance, Generals Amherst and Hawley, and other officers of high rank and large military experience. Notwithstanding a heavy rain and a high wind, he fired during the space of 4 or 5 minutes, at the rate of 4 shots per minute, at a target 200 yards distance. He next fired 6 shots in a minute. He also fired while advancing at the rate of 4 miles per hour, 4 times in a minute. He then poured a bottle of water into the pan and barrel of the rifle when loaded, so as to wet every grain of powder, and in less than half a minute he fired it off, as well as ever without extracting the ball. Lastly, he hit the bullseye target lying on his back on the ground. These military dignitaries were not only satisfied, but astonished at the perfection of both the rifle and his practice. On one of these occasions, George III honored him with his presence, and towards the close of the year, a patent was granted for all of his improvements. Anxious to take an active part in the American War, 100 select men were chosen for his commands, whom he took unwearied pains to instruct in the dexterous use of his newly invented rifle. In the spring of 1777, he was sent to America, to him a much coveted service. Joining the main army under Sir Henry Clinton, he was placed at the head of a corps of riflemen picked from the different regiments, and soon after participated under Sir William Howe in the Battle of Brandywine on the 11th of September. General Knyphausen, says a British writer, with another division marched to Chad's Ford against the provincials who were placed there. In this service the German general experienced very important assistance from a corps of riflemen commanded by Captain Patrick Ferguson, whose meritorious conduct was acknowledged by the whole British army. In a private letter from Captain Ferguson to his kinsman, Dr. Adam Ferguson, he details a very curious incident which occurred while he lay with his riflemen in the skirt of a wood in front of Knyphausen's division. "We had not lain long," says Captain Ferguson, "when a rebel officer, remarkable by a hussar dress, passed towards our army, within 100 yards of my flank, not perceiving us. He was followed by another dressed in dark green and blue, mounted on a bay horse, with a remarkably high-cocked hat. I ordered 3 good shots to steal near to and fire at them, but the idea disgusting me I recalled the order. The hussar, in returning, made a circuit, but the other passed within 100 yards of us, upon which I advanced from the woods toward him. Upon my calling he stopped, but after looking at me he proceeded. I again drew his attention and made signs to him to stop, leveling my piece at him, but he slowly cantered away. As I was within that distance at which, in the quickest firing, I could have lodged 6 balls in or about him before he was out of my reach, I had only to determine. But it was not pleasant to fire at the back of an unoffending individual, who was acquitting himself very coolly of his duty, so I let him alone. The day after, I had been telling the story to some wounded officers who lay in the same room with me, where one of the surgeons who had been dressing the wounded rebel officers came in, and told us that they had been informing him that General Washington was all morning with the light troops, and only attended by a French officer in hussar dress. He himself dressed and mounted in every point as above described. I am not sorry that I did not know at the time who it was. There is, however, some doubt whether it was really Washington whom Ferguson was too generous to profit by his advantage. James Fenimore Cooper relates in the New York Mirror of April 16, 1831, on the authority of his late father-in-law, Major John P. Delancey, some interesting facts corroborating the main features of the story. Delancey was the second in command of Ferguson's riflemen, and had seen Washington in Philadelphia the year before the commencement of the war. During the maneuvers which preceded the Battle of Brandywine, said Mr. Cooper, these riflemen were kept skirmishing in advance of one of the British columns. They had crossed some open grounds, in which Ferguson was wounded in the arm, and had taken a position in the skirts of a thick wood. While Captain Delancey was occupied in arranging a sling for Ferguson's wounded arm, it was reported that an American officer of rank, attended only by a mounted orderly, had ridden into the open grounds, and was then within point-blank rifle shots. 2 or 3 of the best marksmen stepped forward, and asked leave to bring him down. Ferguson peremptorily refused, but he went to the wood, and showing himself, menaced the American with several rifles, while he called to him and made signs to him to come in. The mounted officer saw his enemies, drew his reins, and sat looking at them attentively for a few moments. The horseman turned and rode slowly away. To his last moment, Ferguson maintained that the officer whose life he had spared was Washington. I have often heard Captain Delancey relate these circumstances, and though he never pretended to be sure of the person of the unknown horseman, it was his opinion, from some particulars of dress and stature, that it was the Count Pulaski. Though in error as to the person of the individual to whom he spared, the merit of Major Ferguson is not at all diminished by its supposed correction. Captain Ferguson, as we have seen, encountered some American sharpshooters in the battle as keen and skillful as himself in the use of the rifle, and received a dangerous wound, which so shattered his right arm as to forever after render it useless. During the period of his unfitness for service, General Howe distributed his riflemen among the corps, but on his recovery he again embodied them, and renewed his former active career. When satisfied that he would never regain the use of his right hands, he practiced and soon acquired the use of his sword with the left. When the British evacuated Philadelphia in June 1778, Captain Ferguson accompanied the retiring forces to New York, and of course participated in the Battle of Monmouth on the way. It was fought on one of the hottest days of the summer, when many of the British soldiers died from the effects of the heat. For some time after reaching New York, Captain Ferguson and his rifle corps were not called on to engage in any active service. Little Egg Harbor on the eastern coast of New Jersey had long been noted as a place of rendezvous for American privateers, which preyed largely upon British commerce. A vast amount of property had been brought into this port, captured from the enemy. To destroy this nest of rebel pirates, as a British writer termed it, an expedition was fitted out from New York, the close of September 1778, composed of 300 regulars and a body of 100 Royalist volunteers, all under the command of Captain Ferguson. Captain Henry Collins of the Navy transported the troops in 8 or 10 armed vessels, and shared in the enterprise. From untoward weather they were long at sea. Ferguson's party reached the harbor on the afternoon of the 5th of October, and taking his smaller craft pushed 20 miles up the stream to Chestnut Neck, where were several vessels, about a dozen houses with stores for the reception of the prize goods, and accommodations for the privateers' men. The prize vessels were hastily scuttled and dismantled, and the small American party easily driven into the woods, when Captain Ferguson's force demolished the batteries, burning 10 vessels and the houses in the village. Returning the next day down the river, they reached 2 of their armed sloops, which had got aground on their upward passage, and were still fast. They were lightened and got off the next morning. During the delay, Captain Ferguson employed his troops under the cover of the gunboats in an excursion on the north shore, to destroy some principal salt works and also some stores, dwellings, and Tucker's Mill. These were sacked and laid in ashes. Recalling these predatory parties back to New York, Sir Henry Clinton directed Admiral Gambier to write Captain Collins in their joint behalf that they thought it unsafe for him and Captain Ferguson to remain longer in New Jersey. But Captain Collins's vessels, being windbound for several days, gave Captain Ferguson time for another enterprise. On the evening of the 13th of October, some deserters from Pulaski's Legion gave information of that corps being posted within striking distance, 11 miles up the river. Ferguson then formed the design of attempting their surprise. Accordingly, Ferguson selected 250 men, partly Marines, leaving in boats at 11 o'clock on the night of the 14th, and after rowing 10 miles they reached a bridge at 4 o'clock the next morning, within a mile of Pulaski's infantry. The bridge was seized so as to cover their retreat, and 50 men left for its defense. De Bosen's infantry companies were surrounded and completely surprised, and attacked as they emerged from their houses. It being a night attack, says Ferguson in his report, little quarter could, of course, be given, so they cut and slashed and bayoneted, killing all who came in their way, and taking only 5 prisoners. The Americans, roused from their slumbers, fought as well as they could. Ferguson's loss, as he reported it, was 2 killed, 3 wounded, and 1 missing. He attempted to excuse the butchery of Pulaski's unsuspecting infantry by alleging that he learned from the deserters who came to him that the Count had in public orders forbade all granting of quarters, information which proved to be false, and which Ferguson should never have trusted, especially on the word of deserters. It is creditable, however, to his humanity, amid the excitements and horrors of war, that he refrained from wantonly destroying the houses of non-combatants, though they sheltered the personal effects of his enemies. We had an opportunity, says Ferguson in his report to Sir Henry Clinton, of destroying part of the baggage and equipage of Pulaski's legion by burning their quarters, but as the houses belong to some inoffensive Quakers, who I am afraid have sufficiently suffered already in the confusion of a night's scramble, I know, sir, that you will think with us that the injury to be thereby done to the enemy would not have compensated for the sufferings of these innocent people. Irving denounces Ferguson's enterprise as a marauding expedition, worthy of the times of the buccaneers. Sir Henry Clinton, on the other hand, reported it to the home governments as a success under the direction of that very active and zealous officer, Ferguson, while Admiral Gambier pronounced it as a spirited service. Ferguson fully accomplished the purpose for which he set out, the destruction of the vessels, stores, and works at Little Egg Harbor, and in addition inflicted a severe blow on a portion of Pulaski's legion. During the campaign of 1779, Captain Ferguson was engaged in several predatory incursions along the coast and on the Hudson, having been stationed a while at Stony Point before its capture by Wayne, steadily increasing the confidence of his superiors and extorting the respect of the Americans for his valor and enterprise. On the 25th of October in this year, he was promoted to the rank of Major in the 2nd Battalion of the 71st Regiment, or Highland Light Infantry, composed of Frasers, Campbells, MacArthurs, MacDonalds, MacLeods, and many others of the finest Scotch laddies in the British service. When Sir Henry Clinton fitted out the expedition against Charleston at the close of 1779, he very naturally selected Major Ferguson to share in the important enterprise. A corps of 300 men, called the American Volunteers, was assigned for his command, he having the choice of both officers and soldiers, and for this special service he had given him the rank of lieutenant colonel. At his request, Major Henger's corps of 200 Hessians were to be joined to Ferguson's. Early in February, the 71st Regiment and Ferguson's corps were sent from Savannah to Augusta, and early in March, the American Volunteers formed a part of the Georgia troops, who were ordered under General Patterson to march towards Charleston and join the main force under Sir Henry Clinton. On the 13th of the month, Lieutenant Colonel Ferguson, with his volunteers, and Major Cochrane, with the infantry of Tarleton's legion, were ordered forward to secure the passes at Dee Creek, Coosawhatchee, and Tullyfinney bridges. These active officers with their light troops received intelligence of two parties of mounted Americans at some distance in advance, and at once resolved to surprise them by a night attack, a kind of service for which Colonel Ferguson had an especial fitness, and in which he took unusual delight. Arriving at 9 o'clock in the evening near the spot from which he meant to dislodge the Americans, at McPherson's plantation, Ferguson discovered that they had decamped, and he consequently took possession of their abandoned position, camping there for the night and awaiting the arrival of the main British force, who were to pass near it the next morning. Major Cochrane with his party, piloted by another route, through swamps and byways arrived before morning, just in front of Ferguson's camp, and judging by the fires that the Americans were still there, led his men to the attack with fixed bayonets. Ferguson, expecting that the American party might return, had his picket guard out, who, seeing the approach of what they regarded as an enemy, gave the alarm, when the legion rushed upon them, driving them pell-mell to Ferguson's camp, where the aroused American volunteers were ready to receive them. Charge was the word on both sides, and for a little season the conflict raged. Ferguson, wielding his sword in his left hand, defended himself as well as he could against 3 assailants who opposed him with fixed bayonets, one of which was unfortunately thrust through his left arm. When on the point of falling amid the confusion and clashing of arms, Major Cochrane and Colonel Ferguson, almost at the same moment, recognized each other's voices, and exerted themselves to put a stop to the mistaken conflict. But for the timely recognition on the part of the commanders of the mutual mistake, Colonel Ferguson would most likely have lost his life, a life, says Major Henger, equally valuable to the whole army and to his friends. The whole army felt for the gallant Ferguson, and the peculiar circumstances attending this unlucky conflict long furnished the camp and bivouac with a melancholy topic of conversation. The fleet having crossed the bar and gained the water command thence to Charleston, enabled Sir Henry Clinton to bestow more attention than he had hitherto done, to cutting off the communications of the Americans between the city and the country. A body of militia, together with the remains of 3 Continental regiments of light dragoons, led by Colonel Washington and others, and all under the command of General Huger, were stationed at Biggin Bridge, near Moncks Corner, about 30 miles from Charleston. To destroy or disperse this party and thus prevent supplies of food and reinforcements of men to the beleaguered city was a capital object of Sir Henry Clinton, and its immediate execution was assigned to Colonel Tarleton and his legion, to be seconded by Lieutenant Colonel Ferguson and his riflemen. Tarleton was dashing, tireless, and unmerciful. Ferguson, says Irving, was a fit associate for Tarleton in hardy scrambling and partisan enterprise, equally intrepid and determined, but cooler, and more open to impulses of humanity. As a night march had been judged the most advisable, Tarleton and Ferguson moved on the evening of April 13th from Goose Creek, halfway from Charleston, to strike, if possible, an effective blow at Huger's camp. Some distance beyond, a black man was descried attempting to leave the road and avoid notice. He was seized and was discovered to be a servant of one of Huger's officers. A letter was taken from his pocket written by his master the preceding afternoon, which the black man's intelligence, purchased for a few dollars, proved a fortunate circumstance for the advancing party. They learned the relative positions of Huger's force on both sides of Cooper River, and had in him a guide to direct them there, through unfrequented paths and byways. Destitute of patrols, Huger was, in effect, taken completely by surprise, and the bold and sudden onset about 3 o'clock in the morning of the 14th quickly scattered the astonished Americans. They had indeed some slight notice of the attack, but they were not properly prepared for it. The cavalry was posted on the side of the river where the first approach was made, and the infantry on the opposite bank. Then Major Cochrane, with Tarleton's legion, quickly forced the passage of Biggin Bridge, and drove General Huger and the infantry before him. In this affair, says James, Major James Conyers of the Americans distinguished himself by a skillful retreat, and by calling off the attention of the enemy from his sleeping friends to himself. In this surprise, the British made free use of the bayonets. The houses in Moncks Corner, then a village, were afterwards deserted, but long bore the marks of deadly thrust and much bloodshed. Several officers who attempted to defend themselves were killed or wounded. The assailing party lost but 1 officer and 2 privates wounded, with 5 horses killed or disabled. General Huger, Colonel Washington, and Major Jameson, with most of their troops, fled to the adjacent swamps and thickets, while 3 captains, 1 lieutenant, and 10 privates were killed. 1 major, 1 captain, 2 lieutenants, and 15 privates were wounded, and 64 officers and men, including the wounded, were made prisoners. Poor General Huger and his aide, John Izard, remained in the swamp from Friday morning, the time of the surprise, till the succeeding Monday. It was a long fast, and the exposure produced severe sickness on the part of the general, causing him to retire a while from the service. British historians repel with indignant language the charge of permitting the violation or abuse of females to go unpunished. Yet Commissary Stedman relates a case highly derogatory of the conduct of some of Tarleton's legion. In the course of this maraud, several of the dragoons broke into the house of Sir John Colleton in the neighborhood of Moncks Corner, and maltreated and attempted violence upon 3 ladies residing there. One, the wife of a Charleston physician, a most delicate and beautiful woman, was most barbarously treated. Another lady received 1 or 2 sword wounds, while an unmarried lady, a sister of a prominent American major, was also shamefully misused. The guilty dragoons were apprehended and brought to camp, where by this time Colonel Webster had arrived and taken the command. Colonel Ferguson, says Stedman, was for putting the dragoons to instant death. But Colonel Webster did not conceive that his powers extended to that of holding a general court-martial. The prisoners were, however, sent to headquarters, and I believe were afterwards tried and whipped. This decisive action on the part of Colonel Ferguson was highly creditable to his head and his heart. Tarleton, possessing none of the finer feelings of human nature, failed to second Ferguson's efforts to bring the culprits to punishment. For afterwards in England he had the effrontery to boast in the presence of a lady of respectability that he had killed more men and ravished more women than any man in America. The long protracted siege of Charleston was now drawing to a close. In the latter part of April, Colonel Ferguson marched down with a party and captured a small redoubt at Hadrill's Point, half a mile above Sullivan's Island, and on the 7th of May he obtained permission to attack Fort Moultrie, and while upon the march for that object, he received intelligence of the surrender of the fort to Captain Hudson, who was relieved of the command by Colonel Ferguson. And shortly thereafter General Lincoln gave up the city he had so long and so valiantly defended. So that is the end of this chapter from Lyman C. Draper's 1881 book, Kings Mountain and Its Heroes. We heard about Patrick Ferguson, who seemed to be one of the more honorable and humane leaders in the British military, and we also heard about Banastre Tarleton, who was one of the British commanders most despised by the Americans, and also by some of his fellow British soldiers. The Colleton House near Moncks Corner, South Carolina, was the home of John Colleton. However, he had died in 1777. He was actually considered a loyalist Tory by the local Patriots, although he was opposed to taxation and to the use of force in the North. His wife was one of the women attacked by the dragoons. I am now going to read this account of the attack on the Colleton House from Loyalist Lieutenant Anthony Allaire's diary. Friday the 14th. Remained at Moncks Corner, collecting the stores, etc. About 7 o'clock at night, accidentally a storehouse caught fire, in which were 2 casks of powder. Was very much alarmed by the explosion, and all got under arms. This confusion was scarcely over, when 3 ladies came to our camp in great distress. Lady Colleton, Miss Betsy Giles, and Miss Jean Russell. They had been most shockingly abused by a plundering villain. Lady Colleton badly cut in the hand by a broadsword, and bruised very much. After my friend, Dr. Johnson, dressed her hands, he with an officer and 12 men went to the plantation, about 1 mile from camp, to protect Mrs. Fay Sue, whom this infamous villain had likewise abused in the same manner. There he found a most accomplished, amiable lady, in the greatest distress imaginable. After he took a little blood from her, she was more composed, and next morning came to camp to testify against the cursed villain that abused them in this horrid manner. He was secured and sent to headquarters for trial. Saturday the 15th. The army got in motion about 12 o'clock. My friend Dr. Johnson and myself had the happiness of escorting the ladies to their plantation. Before we got there, we were met by a servant informing us that there were more plunderers in the house. This news so shocked Lady Colleton and Miss Fay Sue, who were some distance before us, and the young ladies in a carriage, that I am not able to describe their melancholy situation, which was truly deplorable. After their fright was a little over, we passed on to their house, but the ladies fearing to stay alone, Lady Colleton and Mrs. Fay Sue got into the carriage, Miss Giles behind me, and Miss Russell on a horse, which I led for fear he should make off with my fair one. They passed on with us 4 miles to a plantation called Mulberry Broughton, and here we bid adieu to our fair companions with great regret, they thinking themselves out of danger of any insults. We this day countermarched to the 23-mile house and halted all night. So that's it for this episode. It is unclear who the actual perpetrators of these attacks on Mrs. Colleton and the other women were, but it sounds like they may have been Hessian mercenaries. Mrs. Colleton's husband had been a British loyalist Tory, but that did not prevent her house from being attacked. Let us know what you think about these events in the comments, and stay tuned to this channel for more history leading up to the pivotal Battle of Kings Mountain. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that has now been cast aside as unworthy to show on history channels on TV. Here on this channel, we try to cover the history that other channels pass over or cover up, and we do so by reading directly from old books. If you'd like to support our channel, then you can join our Patreon page or become a YouTube channel member. Members will have full access to all of our members-only videos, and your contribution will be recognized at the end of each episode. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.